I'm Marjorie Brent, 71 years old, and after 37 years of teaching second grade, I thought I'd seen it all. That Saturday, I drove across town to my oldest son's house. The street was already lined with cars, and my heart was beating a little faster than usual. My grandson, Aiden, was turning 14, and it was the first time in months our whole family would be together when I parked my old Ford near the curb. I checked my hair in the mirror and smoothed my navy blue dress. I'd wrapped a small gift for Aiden and placed it gently on the passenger seat just before I stepped out. Someone shouted, "Grandma's here," and that's when everything started. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever felt like your own family stopped seeing you, I've lived in Fairview, Texas all my life, raised 3 kids in a white clapboard house with a creaky porch swing and a kitchen that always smelled like something. Baking my husband Robert passed away 5 years ago, and since then, the kids had started treating me more like a responsibility than a person. I never complained. I just kept showing up with birthday gifts and potato salad, trying to hold us together. I'd been a teacher for most of my life. Small-town public school. The kind of place where you remembered every student's name and their favorite book. I taught hundreds of kids how to write their first sentence and count by twos. But nothing prepared me for how invisible you start to feel once your own children think you're past your usefulness. Norris, my oldest, opened the door. He's 46 now, works in insurance, has a nice house with tall ceilings and spotless tile floors. His voice was clipped when he saw me. "You're half an hour late," he said. "We were about to start without you," I told him. Traffic had been bad. That wasn't true. I'd just taken too long deciding what to wear, not wanting to look like someone they'd feel sorry for inside the house. Everything gleamed. The leather sofas, the crystal light fixtures, the spotless white counters. Audrey? His wife barely glanced at me, said hello without looking up, then disappeared into the kitchen. She's an interior decorator, always polite, always distant. My daughter Meredith came over next, red curls swinging. She hugged me quick and tight, like she always does. "You look tired, Mom," she said. "You should wear brighter colors sometime, something with a little life in it." I looked down at my dress. I'd always liked this one, Quincy. My youngest sat near the window with his wife Shannon. They both stood, but only he hugged me. Shannon nodded and called me Marjorie. Never Mom, never mother-in-law. She always kept that distance. "How are the girls?" I asked Tanner and Paisley. "They're with the other kids," Quincy said. "Tanner just won a math award, and Paisley's struggling a bit in English. I offered to help, but Shannon cut me off." "We've hired a tutor," she said quickly. "Teaching's changed since you retired, Marjorie." Didn't say anything, just smiled and nodded. The same way I used to with difficult parents at parent-teacher conferences in the middle of the room. Aiden was opening presents. He lit up when he saw the kit I'd given him, a model airplane that he could build himself. He said it was cool and smiled the same crooked way his granddad used to. But the moment didn't last. Norris came over and told him to put it away. "We're about to cut the cake," he said. "Not now." I spoke up gently. The boy just wanted to see his gift, but Norris gave me that look, the one children give when they think they've outgrown your opinion. "Mom, we have rules," he said. "Don't undermine me in front of my son." I nodded and followed Audrey to the kitchen when she asked me to help set the table. Her voice was smooth, her smile practiced. Something felt off. I couldn't quite name it, but there was a heaviness in the air, and the way everyone moved and spoke told me there was something they didn't want me to know. Then Meredith walked in, said, "The lawnmower in the garage was making a strange noise," and asked me to look at it. I hesitated. It seemed like an odd time for that, but she insisted. Said it would just take 5 minutes and the kids wanted to play Monopoly before cake. I followed her through the hallway into the garage, and that's when the door closed behind me and the lock clicked. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing what I'd just heard. The latch had clicked behind me, quiet sure, and the door didn't budge when I tried it. I jiggled the handle once, then again, harder. Still locked. "Meredith," I called. No answer. My hand hovered on the knob, waiting, hoping. Then her voice came muffled through the door, gentle but too rehearsed. "We just need to talk, Mom. We'll let you out in an hour, I promise." I stared at the door, unsure what to say. Norris's voice followed next, firmer. "Please, Mom, don't make a scene. It's nothing personal. Just give us some space to talk things through." Quincy's voice came after that. "We'll be quick. Just sit tight, okay?" I stayed frozen in place for several seconds, still holding the doorknob. There was a single chair in the corner, a light bulb overhead, casting a pale circle of light across the floor. It was quiet out there, save for the faint sound of children's laughter through the wall and the hum of music from the living room. It didn't feel real. Then I heard a soft knock. A small voice on the other side of the door asked Grandma, "Are you okay?" It was Paisley. I took a breath and answered as gently as I could. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." There was a pause, and then Shannon's voice barked, "Paisley, go play." I heard her footsteps scatter off. I sat down slowly in the chair, the metal legs creaking beneath me. I looked around the garage, neat, cold, organized like everything else in Norris's house. For a long moment, I just sat listening to the muted voices of my children discussing something I wasn't meant to hear. Then something stirred in me, an old memory. Robert years ago showing me a small door behind one of the tool cabinets. He'd made it when Aiden was a baby. A bit of Christmas magic, he'd called it. So Santa can make an entrance. I stood up and moved to the far wall. The cabinet was lighter than I expected. When I slid it to the side, I saw the outline of the door painted to match the wall. I crouched, ran my fingers along the edge, and found the latch. It gave with a quiet snap. The door opened smoothly. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. I hesitated, but only for a second. Then I ducked my head and began to move forward on my hands and knees, the air growing warmer as I got closer to the other side. The tunnel opened into the utility room off the kitchen, just as Robert had said it would all those years ago. I stood up, brushed off my dress, and stepped into the dim room, careful not to make a sound. On the other side of the door, I could hear voices in the kitchen, Audrey and Shannon. "Are you sure she'll be comfortable in there?" Shannon asked. "She's got a chair," Audrey replied. "And it's not forever. We just need to sort this out without her interrupting." "She's not going to like it," Shannon muttered. "It's not about liking it," Audrey said. "It's about doing what's best." Eunice has always been the type to insert herself into every little thing. Their voices faded as the kitchen door opened and closed again. I waited a few seconds, then crept out of the utility room and down the side hallway toward the guest bathroom. If I listened carefully there, I might hear what was happening in the living room. The voices came in faintly at first, then clearer. "I don't like this," Quincy said. "We locked her in the garage. That feels wrong." "Because she'd throw a fit," Norris replied. "You remember what happened last time? I just mentioned hiring a part-time housekeeper, and she acted like I'd insulted her whole existence." "She's not helpless," Meredith said. "She's just lonely. Lonely and heating a 4-bedroom house by herself," Norris added. "The bills are outrageous, and let's not pretend she's managing everything fine. The place needs repairs she can't afford. We need to be realistic." There was a long silence. "I found a place," Shannon said after a pause. "Sunny Hills. It's got medical staff organized activities meals. It's nice." "A retirement home?" Meredith asked. "No, it's a community," Shannon replied. "It's safe. It's nearby." "She'd never agree to that," Meredith said flatly. "That's why we're deciding now," Norris said. "We present it as a done deal. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in this same cycle." "She loves that house," Meredith said. "She's not just going to pack up and leave because we say so." There was a shift in tone then. More hushed voices, a brief scuffle of chairs. Then Shannon again. Kid, she called. Aiden Tanner Paisley, come here. I could hear the children's footsteps bounding in. Do you think Grandma would be happier living somewhere with other grandmas and grandpas? Shannon asked sweetly. With a garden and friendly nurses and people her own age? There was a pause. Then Aiden's voice. Can we visit her? Of course, Norris said. Even more often than now. Paisley's voice came last. Quiet. But I like Grandma's house. It smells like cookies and old books. You can bake cookies anywhere, Shannon said. Books just collect dust. The voices drifted again. I moved from the hallway toward the dining room, stopping behind the large sideboard that faced the living room. From there, I could see shadows cast on the floor, and I could hear everything. She's been forgetting things, Norris was saying. Last week, she left the oven on. The neighbor called me after smelling gas. She was distracted, Meredith said. She'd just talked to me on the phone. It happens. And last Thursday, Norris added she didn't recognize the mailman she's known for 15 years. She told me he was out that week, Meredith countered. They had a temp with tattoos. She didn't know him. I wouldn't have either. She's not well, Norris said. The roof is leaking. The porch is uneven. The foundation's cracking. We sell. Now get her settled, and I can use the commission from the sale to help her and cover some of my own. There was a beat of silence. Your own what? Meredith asked. I'm about to lose my job, Norris admitted. If I don't land this project, I'm out. The shopping center deal. If I can bring in her property, it keeps me employed. You didn't think to tell us, Quincy asked. I didn't want to worry anyone. And you thought selling Mom's house behind her back was the solution? Meredith's voice tightened. The house she's lived in her whole life, I was going to talk to her, Norris insisted. Just not yet. More silence followed. Then a low, pained voice from Meredith. You're not the only one struggling, you know. I'm 3 months behind on studio rent. Norris didn't answer. Quincy did. Maybe we should just ask her. Let her decide. She'll say no. Norris said. She'll dig in and make everything harder. It's better to handle it and present her with a choice that's already made. The room went still. I stayed behind the sideboard, listening still. They were planning my future without me, discussing where I'd live, what I could manage, what made sense for them. And they'd locked me in the garage so they wouldn't have to hear what I had to say about any of it. I leaned against the wall, trying to gather myself. The floor creaked faintly beneath me. Someone turned their head. I moved quickly back toward the kitchen, back into the utility room. I needed time to think. I needed to get back before anyone noticed I'd been gone. Back through the secret tunnel into the garage again. I slid the cabinet into place and sat in the chair. The light still hummed above me. The same quiet space. No one would have guessed I'd ever left. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the closed door. They thought they could plan my life behind my back. They thought wrong. I stayed in that garage for a long while still and quiet, the faint tick of the bulb overhead keeping time. I could hear laughter from the living room, now the soft clatter of forks on plates, the rise and fall of voices. They'd moved on to cake, I guessed. Presents. The kind of cheerful noise that used to fill my own kitchen when the children were small. At some point, I heard footsteps outside the door. Shannon's voice called my name, followed by a brief pause. Then the door creaked open. There you are, she said, squinting into the dim light. Norris asked me to check on you. I stood and gave her a small nod. I've been here the whole time. She gave me a look I couldn't quite place, something between apology and embarrassment, then stepped aside to let me pass. They're in the living room with the kids. I'll be right there, I said, and brushed past her, heading for the hallway. Instead of turning toward the noise, I went the other way, back through the kitchen, past the pantry, and toward the stairs. Upstairs was quieter. The carpet softened each step, and the bedrooms were mostly dark. I didn't have a clear reason for going up there at first. I just needed space to think. A place to be still without anyone watching. When I reached the top, I heard something soft music, the gentle scratch of a pen. A door was open, just a crack. It was Aiden's old room, now mostly used for storage, but tonight the lamp was on, and Paisley was sitting cross-legged on the bed, writing in a small notebook. She didn't notice me at first. I knocked gently against the doorframe. Her head snapped up. "Grandma," she whispered. "I thought you were in the garage." I stepped into the room and closed the door quietly behind me. "Let's keep that part between us," I said. Paisley grinned and set the notebook on her lap. "Did you climb out the window?" "Not quite," I said, lowering myself carefully onto the edge of the bed. "Your grandfather built a little door years ago, back when Aiden was a baby." "A secret passage?" she asked, eyes wide. I nodded. He used to sneak through it on Christmas Eve to leave gifts under the tree. Paisley reached for the notebook again, but hesitated, her fingers brushing the cover. "What are you writing?" I asked. "Just thoughts," she said, then added quickly. "Don't tell Mom. She says diaries are silly." I smiled. "I used to write in a diary too, you know. Helps sort out your feelings." She looked at me for a moment, then slowly turned the notebook around and held it out. "You can read it, if you want." "Are you sure?" She nodded. I took the book gently and flipped to the first few pages. The handwriting was small, neat, a bit pressed down in spots like she'd been gripping the pen too tightly. I read about a math test, a ballet class, her mom's lectures, her dad's silence. Then came a page with a small photo taped inside a picture of an old oak tree with a handwritten note beneath it, Grandma's backyard. She said, "Grandpa planted it. I want to take more pictures like this." I turned the page again. Another entry, a weekend visit. We'd baked a pie, taken a walk, and she'd snapped photos of the garden. She wrote that I listened, that I didn't tell her to do better or try harder, that she felt more like herself around me than anywhere else. She watched me carefully as I handed the notebook back. "I like photography," she said quietly. "But Mom says it won't get me into college. It's not silly," I told her. "And you're good at it." Paisley's shoulders relaxed just a little. "You think so? I saw how you framed that tree. You've got an eye." She hugged the notebook to her chest. "Sometimes I wish I lived with you instead. It's quieter. You listen." There wasn't much I could say to that. After a moment, she asked, "Is it true? Are they sending you away?" I hesitated, then nodded. "That's the plan, but I haven't agreed to anything." She looked down. "If I had to live somewhere without my books or my pictures, I'd be really sad." I nodded. "I'd miss my garden, the tree your grandfather planted, the way the morning light comes through the kitchen window." We sat there together for a bit. No rush. Just the two of us, a soft lamp glow, and the weight of a quiet truth between us. Downstairs, I heard the sharp clink of forks against plates and the start of a birthday song. "You should go," I said gently. "They'll be looking for you." Paisley nodded and slipped off the bed. At the door, she paused and turned back. "What are you going to do?" "I'm thinking on it," I told her. "But don't worry, I'm not done yet." She gave me a small smile, then slipped into the hallway. When the door clicked shut behind her, I stood and crossed to the window. Aiden's room overlooked the backyard. I could see the corner of the garden, the row of hydrangeas, and the trellis Robert built one spring. Everything looked still peaceful. the kind of quiet that carries weight. I stayed there a few minutes longer, watching the breeze move the branches. I knew now that it wasn't just me who felt unheard in that house. Paisley, too, had been quietly pushed aside, expected to bend and mold herself into someone else's plan. And just like I'd taught hundreds of children to do over the years, I knew it was time to listen first and then act. The hallway was empty when I opened the door. I moved quietly back toward the stairs, already starting to piece things together in my mind. I'd overheard enough to know their plans. But now I knew something more important. I wasn't alone. And that changed everything. The hallway was still quiet when I stepped out of Aiden's room. I didn't hear any voices or footsteps upstairs, and the sound of laughter downstairs had shifted to something more distant, like the party was moving toward its end. I made my way back down slowly, one hand on the railing, my thoughts turning over as I walked. By the time I reached the bottom step, I knew what I needed to do. I paused near the kitchen door and listened. Someone was opening and closing cabinets, but no one spoke. It wasn't the moment to be seen, not yet. I turned and headed toward the other side of the house, back to the hallway near the garage. The secret door was still hidden behind the cabinet just as I'd left it. I slid the cabinet aside, crouched down, and slipped back into the passage. The tunnel was familiar now, narrow, quiet, filled with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. At the far end, I eased open the door into the garage and stood for a moment in the cool, dim light. I sat back on the chair and folded my hands in my lap. The light bulb overhead flickered once and then steadied. Everything looked exactly the same, but something in me had shifted. I thought about what I'd overheard and what Paisley had shared with me upstairs. I thought about how none of them, not one of my children, had asked me how I felt about any of it. And yet, even through the ache of that, I could still see their struggles, Meredith's silence, Quincy's discomfort, even Norris's desperation. There had to be a way to make them understand, not by scolding, not by confrontation, but by showing them something they couldn't ignore. Robert always said, if you want to change how people see you, show them what they've missed. That was what I would do. I returned through the tunnel once more this time, with a plan forming step by step. The house was still busy when I emerged through the pantry, but no one was in the kitchen. From there, I walked the long way around toward the far staircase that led to the second floor. It was the quietest route one I used to take when putting babies down for naps years ago. I started with Norris and Audrey's bedroom. The desk near the window was stacked with papers and a few half-open folders. I sorted through them carefully, glancing at the headers. One was marked Oak Hill Redevelopment Project. I opened it. Inside were printed maps with property lines marked, one of them circled in red, my house, with the word priority scribbled in the margin. Next to it, a letter from Norris's insurance company. It mentioned upcoming layoffs, performance targets, and something about department closures. I folded both papers and slid them into an envelope I had brought with me. From my purse, I added a copy of my bank statement. Robert and I had been careful with our savings, and a short note I'd written earlier that morning. Norris, I know about your work situation. I know why my house is part of this project. If you need help, we can talk honestly, openly. But decisions about my home will be made by me, not for me. Mom, I left the envelope in the top drawer of the desk, just beneath his planner. Next was the guest room at the end of the hall, Meredith's usual space when she stayed overnight. Her things were scattered across the bed, as always. I found her leather-bound notebook on the nightstand. Inside were sketches of pottery, scattered notes, and pages of calculations. Rent, clay costs, past due bills. Her handwriting was tight, crowded with numbers underlined and circled. I took out the page marked Studio Late Fees, folded it gently, and placed it into another envelope, along with a business card from Dorothy, a gallery owner I'd known for years. I'd already called Dorothy that morning and mentioned Meredith's work. She'd been curious. Meredith. You should have told me. We've always believed in your talent. I spoke to someone who might be interested in your pieces. Give her a call. There's no shame in needing help, but it matters how you ask. Mom? I placed the envelope on top of her pillow. Then I went to the last room. Quincy and Shannon were staying in the larger guest suite next to the girls' bedroom. The bed was neatly made. Shannon's suitcase was open and organized folded clothes lined up by color. On the nightstand, her phone was charging. I didn't need the phone itself, just the photos. I scrolled quickly through her albums and found what I was looking for. Photo after photo of Tanner ballet recitals, spelling bees, soccer practice. Only a few of Paisley, and even those were posed stiff. In one picture, Paisley stood at the edge of a dance floor, her arms held awkwardly, eyes downcast. I selected that photo, then scrolled back further until I found the one I remembered. Paisley sitting under the oak tree in my backyard, her camera lifted to the fading sun. Her face focused, calm, content. I sent both photos to Norris's printer, wirelessly linked, just as I remembered from last Thanksgiving when he printed boarding passes from upstairs. I picked up the prints and slid them into a third envelope, along with a handwritten note. Quincy and Shannon. Look at these two photos. One shows your daughter as she is. The other as someone else expects her to be. There's a difference. Please talk to her. She's not trying to disappoint you. She's trying to show you who she is. Marjorie. I returned to their room and set the envelope on the dresser beneath Shannon's planner. On my way out, I passed a stack of brochures on a side table near the hallway window. The top one read, Sunny Hills, a Life Worth Living. I flipped through it slowly. Pictures of cheerful seniors' gardens, reading rooms. On the last page, a list of fees. The numbers were startling. I tore that page out and folded it into my purse. I would need it later. Downstairs, I could hear music again. The party had shifted back into motion. The kids were laughing, and I caught the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Audrey's voice floated through, calling for help with the dessert plates. I retraced my steps one final time through the hallway into the utility room, back through the tunnel. In the garage again, I settled into the chair and smoothed my dress. I waited. Not for long. Shannon opened the door a few minutes later, her expression puzzled. Marjorie, you're still here. I stood calm as ever. I haven't moved. You locked the door, remember? Oh, I think it was stuck. She glanced away quickly. Norris said he was coming to get you. Must have gotten distracted. I'm sure, I said. Cake's almost gone, she offered. But we saved you a slice. I'd like that, I replied, and I'd like to speak with the family before the night ends. She hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. I followed her through the hallway, my pace unhurried. The children were playing a board game near the fireplace. Audrey was refilling glasses. Meredith sat with her knees drawn up on the couch, thumbing through a magazine. Quincy and Norris stood near the stairwell, talking quietly. I glanced once toward the second floor. It wouldn't be long now. Audrey was placing lasagna onto the serving platter when I walked into the kitchen. She glanced up a little startled, but quickly recovered. Dinner's almost ready, she said, adjusting the oven mitts on her hands. Could you call everyone to the table? I nodded. Of course. I turned back toward the living room where the children were still scattered on the rug with their board game. Meredith had moved to the armchair. Norris and Quincy were near the stairs speaking in low tones. Dinner's ready, I said loud enough for the room to hear. Audrey made lasagna. Meredith stood first, stretching her arms. Finally, she said, I'm starving. We'll be right there, Norris added. Just finishing something up. I stepped aside to let them pass, then turned and headed back to the kitchen to help Audrey bring out the dishes. I could see the question in her eyes, but neither of us said anything. We placed the food on the table, one plate at a time. I set out napkins and silverware, moving quietly, carefully, like someone preparing a stage for a performance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Norris glance upstairs. He murmured something to Quincy. The two of them disappeared around the corner, headed for the second floor. I poured water into the glasses. Audrey was slicing bread. A minute passed. 2. Meredith left the kitchen next, saying something about needing to grab her phone. I didn't stop her. I finished setting the table, then stepped back and waited. Norris came down first, his steps slower than usual. He was holding a plain white envelope in one hand, tucked just behind his hip. His face was pale. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I was looking for something," he said. "Found it." "That's good," I replied, and turned to straighten one of the chairs. Meredith returned next, her notebook clutched against her chest. She didn't speak, just sat down and kept her eyes on her plate. Quincy and Shannon were the last to come downstairs. They were gone longer than the others. When they reappeared, Shannon looked tight-lipped, her arms crossed. Quincy's expression had changed. He didn't say anything, but there was a heaviness in the way he walked, like he was carrying something that wasn't quite settled yet. The children were already seated. Aiden was chattering about a new model. He wanted to build something with a motor and propellers. Tanner was arguing about the game rules. Paisley was quiet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. We all took our seats. The room felt different, like a draft had blown through and shifted everything slightly out of place. "Delicious lasagna, Audrey," I said as I passed the bread basket. "You'll have to share your recipe." "Thank you," she replied, offering a small smile. "It's my mother's. I haven't made it in a while." The first few minutes of dinner passed in slow conversation, weather-work, school updates. I asked Aiden about the airplane kit. He beamed and said he'd already started sorting the pieces. I asked Meredith about the craft fair last month. She nodded and mumbled something about new glazes. Quincy barely touched his food. The children finished quickly and asked to be excused. Audrey told them they could return to their game. As their footsteps retreated into the living room, the table fell into silence again. Norris cleared his throat. I watched as he pulled the envelope from his pocket and placed it gently on the table beside his plate. "Mommy said we need to talk about what you left in our rooms." Meredith stiffened. Shannon shifted in her seat. Quincy sat up straighter. I kept my gaze steady. "What would you like to talk about?" This Norris said, tapping the envelope. "The note. The bank statement. The folder. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation," I said, setting my fork down. "Since the last one didn't include me." He hesitated, then asked, "How did you know what we were discussing?" I picked up my water glass and took a sip. "You'd be surprised what an old teacher can hear through a wall, or find in a house she knows better than anyone." Shannon blinked. "Wait, you were out of the garage?" "I was never far," I said simply. "Robert built a few tricks into this house that only he and I ever knew about." No one spoke for a moment. Meredith was the first to look away. Her hands fidgeted with the napkin in her lap. Mom Norris said slowly, "We didn't mean to." "You locked me in the garage," I said, "so you could decide whether to send me away." He winced. "We were worried about you, about your safety. The house is too much. You're alone, and none of you thought to ask me how I feel about that." "We thought you'd say no," Quincy added quietly. "You've always been independent." "I'm not made of glass," I replied. "And I've lived in that house for over 40 years. It's where your father and I built our life. It's not just walls and plumbing to me." Norris looked down. I was trying to solve a problem, he admitted. With work. The house. It seemed like a solution. "I know," I said. "That's why I left you the statement. If you need help, ask. But don't wrap it in concern for me." Meredith took a deep breath and opened her notebook. She pulled a folded paper from between the pages and laid it on the table. "I didn't want you to see this," she said. I was embarrassed. "There's no shame in needing help," I said, "but there's weight in hiding it." "I called the gallery," she murmured. "Dorothy, we're meeting Monday." Quincy reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the photo I'd left. He looked at it, then at me. "She's happiest when she's with you," he said. I hadn't noticed until now. Shannon was silent, but she didn't argue. The table stayed quiet after that. No one rushed to fill the silence. We just sat with it, letting it settle. Finally, I picked up my fork again. "I'm not leaving my home," I said. "But I am open to help. Real help. Not decisions made for me. We could set up a schedule Meredith offered. So one of us visits each week, brings groceries, checks the yard. I'll help with the tech stuff," Quincy said. "Maybe get you better internet." "Just don't turn it into something that needs a manual," I replied. "I still like paper calendars and landlines." That earned a few smiles. Dinner ended on softer footing. Audrey brought in coffee. The children drifted back in for dessert. Paisley slid into the seat beside me and leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. I gave her hand a small squeeze under the table. Norris sat across from me, still holding the envelope I'd given him. He didn't say anything, but he looked different. Humbled, maybe. Quieter. It wasn't a perfect evening, but something had shifted. And I wasn't finished yet. After dessert, the children drifted back into the living room, the way children do quietly in pairs, half listening for adult voices, half lost in their own world. Audrey collected the plates and took them to the kitchen. Shannon remained seated, her posture stiff but not angry, just unsettled. Norris, still holding the envelope I had given him earlier, leaned back in his chair and looked down the table. The room was quiet again. "I'd like to go back to what we started discussing," he said, his voice a little steadier than it had been earlier. "The letter, the loan." I folded my hands in my lap and nodded. "All right, I do need help," he said, "and I appreciate what you offered. I didn't expect it not like that." "I know you didn't," I replied. "That's why I had to do it the way I did. I was going to come to you eventually," he added. I just didn't want to admit how bad it had gotten. "You're not the only one," Meredith said softly. She was still holding her notebook, her thumb pressed against the spine. "I let things go too long," I was embarrassed. "We all let things go," I said. "The problem isn't waiting. The problem is not saying anything when the time finally comes." Quincy was quiet for a while before speaking. "I didn't realize how much we'd been deciding things for you. Not with you. I thought staying quiet was better than stirring up conflict, but I see now that silence can do just as much damage." "Paisley sees it too," I said gently. "She's not as invisible as you think." Shannon looked up at that. Her expression was hard to read, surprised maybe, or thoughtful. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. "I want to be clear," I continued, "that I'm not going anywhere. That house is my home. It may not be perfect, but it's mine. It holds everything I've built. Every part of you is still there. Your height marks on the wall, the tree your father planted, the photographs in the hallway." "I get that now," Norris said. "I don't know why I didn't before. Because you were trying to fix something, I answered. And when we rush to fix things, we forget to listen." "I'll cancel the listing," he said quietly. "The development project. I'll find another way to meet the numbers at work. We can still talk about a loan," I said. "But that conversation happens in my living room, not behind my back." He nodded. Meredith straightened in her chair. "I spoke to Dorothy this afternoon. She wants to see more of my work. I'm bringing a few pieces over next week. She's not promising anything yet, but..." She sounded hopeful. "You've always been talented," I said. You just needed someone else to believe it, too. She asked about you, Meredith added. Said she remembered the quilts you made for the school fundraiser back in the day. She's opening a new space. Wants it to feel like home. Quincy cleared his throat. Paisley and I talked, he said, after you gave us the photos. I showed her the one from under the tree. She smiled the way I haven't seen in weeks. She told me she wants to save up for her own camera, Shannon said. Said she doesn't need the expensive one, just something better than the plastic one she's been using. I didn't realize she was that serious about it. She is, I said. She sees things other people miss. I told her we'd figure something out, Shannon added. Not just the camera. The classes, too, if she wants them. Quincy nodded. We're looking into photography workshops downtown. There's one at the community center. You're listening now? I said. That's all I wanted. Audrey returned from the kitchen with a pot of coffee and a tray of mugs. Anyone want some? She asked. It's the good kind. From the place near the florist. We each took a cup. The clink of ceramic against wood filled the silence for a moment. Shannon reached for the sugar. About Sunny Hills, she said. I was the one who brought it up first. I thought it was the right thing. I had good intentions. I know you did, I said. But I see now, it wasn't about what was right. It was about what was easy. For us. Not for you. I wouldn't have lasted there, I said. Too many planned activities. Not enough space to think. That earned a small smile from her, the first real one I'd seen all day. Quincy leaned forward. We want to help you stay at home. We've been talking, and we can come up with a schedule. Yard work errands, doctor visits if needed. You shouldn't have to do it alone. I'd welcome the company, I said. The garden's been quiet lately. It could use a little laughter. Meredith sipped her coffee. Maybe we should make it a habit Sunday afternoons. Rotate who visits. Bring the kids. And if you ever need something fixed around the house, Norris added. I'll make time. I still remember how to use a wrench. Dad taught me. He'd like that, I said. Aiden wandered into the room just then, holding the half-built airplane. Grandma, he said I can't figure out where this little wire goes. I took the piece from him and turned it in my hand. Let's have a look after we finish our coffee. You and I can figure it out together. He nodded, then disappeared again. I looked around the table at my grown children, each of them different than they were at the start of the day. Tired maybe, but a little more open, a little more themselves. Sometimes it just takes one honest conversation to turn a room around. Outside, the sky had darkened. The windows reflected the glow of the chandelier. I reached for my cup and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were all sitting at the same table, really sitting, really seeing each other. And it wasn't over yet. Norris came by the following Wednesday, not with a folder or proposal this time, but with a sack of fertilizer and 2 new garden gloves still clipped together at the wrist. I was out near the rosebush clipping away the brittle limbs from last season when I heard his car pull in. He didn't honk or call out, just parked, got out, and walked over like it was the most natural thing in the world. Morning, he said, adjusting the brim of his baseball cap. I nodded. You're early. Figured I'd help before the heat kicks in. He didn't waste time. He pulled on the gloves, knelt beside the flower bed, and started pulling weeds with steady hands. We worked in companionable silence for a good while, the kind that doesn't press for talk. Every now and then he asked where something went, or if he was doing it right, and I'd point or nod. When we took a break, he leaned against the fence and looked toward the street. Funny, he said, I drive past this house every week, knew every shingle, every crack in the sidewalk. But it's different now. How so? Now I notice the things you notice. The squirrel that always hides in the gutter. The way the light hits the back window in the afternoon. I guess I was just too busy before. That afternoon, Meredith came by. She brought a shoebox full of fabric scraps and a wide smile I hadn't seen in years. She asked if I still had my sewing machine tucked away in the hall closet. "I was thinking of starting small," she said. "Maybe a pillowcase or two. Dorothy liked that sunflower pattern you used years ago. Said it felt like summer." We spread the fabric out on the dining room table. She ran her fingers over the threads like they were memories, pulling one folding another, holding a scrap up to the light. "Did I ever tell you," she said, "that I used to sit on the stairs and watch you work? I liked the way you hummed when you sewed, like the machine and your voice were in rhythm." I didn't remember humming, but I nodded anyway. Some things are better rediscovered through someone else's eyes. On Saturday, it was Quincy who showed up this time with Paisley. She had a used camera slung around her neck and a quiet focus that reminded me of her father at that age. They wandered the backyard together, taking pictures of birds, blades of grass, old tree bark. Shannon joined them a little later with a notebook in hand and a soft apology folded between her steps. "I made her a schedule," she said, "for her online classes. Photography and drawing. She's good at both. I can tell," I said. "She has an eye." Shannon hesitated. She wants to take portraits too. People. But she's shy about asking. "Start with family," I said. "People who love her face, even when it's behind a camera." She nodded. "Would you mind if she took yours?" We sat in the rocking chair out back, the late sunlight catching on the arms. Paisley adjusted the strap, looked through the viewfinder, then stepped forward without a word. She clicked once, twice, then again. "I like this one," she said softly. "You look peaceful." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "I am." That evening, after everyone had left, I looked around the house. The dishes were stacked neatly by the sink. The humming of the old fridge filled the quiet. On the counter, someone had left a sticky note: "Monday check filters in basement. We've got it. N." Later that week, I had an appointment at the clinic. Audrey drove me. She'd taken the day off without being asked. The drive was calm, her hands steady on the wheel. "They're really trying now," she said, not looking at me. "Your kids." "They are," I said. I used to wonder if it was just me who saw it. How much they leaned on you. How little they asked what you wanted. "They're still learning," I replied. We pulled into the parking lot. She reached over and took my hand. "I'm glad they finally see you the way I always did." That night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light flicker on. The air was soft, with the smell of lavender from the side bushes. I thought of the years I'd spent making sure everyone else had what they needed: rides, recipes, reassurance. I thought of the silence I held for the sake of peace, and how somehow it had taken one holiday dinner for that silence to finally be broken, not in anger, but in truth. They had made mistakes, but now, one by one, they were making it right. The doorbell rang. Aiden stood on the step, holding a folded paper in his hands. "Grandma," he said, "we had to write about our favorite person. I picked you." He handed me the paper, then ran off to the living room where Audrey waited with popcorn and a movie already queued up. I held the note for a long moment, then placed it on the mantel. It felt like the house had shifted, still familiar, still mine, but fuller somehow. And I knew something else was still coming. The last frost passed sometime in April. I remember standing by the back door, barefoot, on the mat, watching the morning sun warm the ground. The rosemary bush had new shoots. The daffodils were late, but they always came when they were ready. I didn't rush them. The kids had started coming by more regularly, not out of guilt, not for show, but because the door was open and they wanted to. Shannon brought me a basket of books one Saturday, all dog-eared and well-loved. "I marked the pages I thought you'd like best," she said. "Hope that's not too forward." It wasn't. I read every one. Meredith called from the grocery store now and then, asking if I needed anything. "Do you still like that lemon shortbread? They've got it on sale." I told her yes, and she showed up with 2 boxes and a new tin for the pantry. On the way out, she kissed my cheek like she used to as a girl. Quincy replaced the light above the sink without being asked. Aiden taught me how to use the new streaming remote. Even Audrey, who never needed to be asked twice now, stayed an extra 5 minutes after dinner, just to make sure I had everything I needed for the week. It didn't happen overnight, and I didn't expect it to. But little by little, the weight I'd carried for so long began to shift. I'd spent years holding space for them, building a home out of steadiness and silence. And now, I could feel them holding space for me, not perfectly, but earnestly. One evening, I sat out back with a cup of tea. The garden was just starting to show color. I thought about all the things I hadn't said over the years, not because I didn't feel them, but because I didn't know if they'd be received. I thought about that night at the restaurant, about the silence that had followed, about the look on Audrey's face when she stood up for me. She didn't do it to prove a point. She did it because she knew I wouldn't. That night had cracked something open, and through it, something softer had grown like spring pushing up through old roots. The truth is, you never stop being a mother, even when the house is quiet and the calendar stays blank. But you can stop letting yourself disappear in the process. I don't regret raising them the way I did. I don't regret giving. But I've learned that there's strength in letting others give back, not to repay a debt, but to stand beside you, to see you. Now when they look at me, I don't just see obligation. I see recognition. I see love unspoken but steady, and that's enough. Before I end this story, I just want to say, if you've ever felt overlooked in your own family, I hope you know your presence matters. Sometimes it takes a quiet shift, a single moment, for everything to start blooming again. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to find your voice later in life, feel free to share it. Just might help someone else find theirs too.